Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Culturally Responsive Built Environments, Lecture 4. And today we are going to discuss about a home, introduction to vernacular architecture. So following a little recapitulation of our Lecture 3, we actually discussed about Bourdieu's habitats, fields, and games. And then we brought a little criticism of Bourdieu's theories from the built environment perspective. And we introduced you to the vernacular architecture, house, form, and architecture, Amos Rappaport's work. So what Rappaport actually points out here, he starts with work in the cultural geography series because there's been a huge discussion on monumental scales. On here you can see the right-hand side, left-hand side, you can see that Dumo is all monumental scales, and most of the architecture has been discussed in developing plazas or the Vatican City plazas or any monumental buildings, the ziggurats. So the great granaries. So this kind of scale, always architecture has been discussed. So what about the folk? What about the peasants' houses? What about the soldiers' houses? What about the common man's living? So has it considered as an architecture? So this is a very fundamental question. So I'm on the right hand side, which you see here is dwellings in Venice, where the embroidery work, the lace work goes on, and you have the shops in the bottom, and you have the dwellings in the top, and they have a small workshop in the, so like that, each and every a common man's house is designed as per his needs. And similarly, a kind of peasant's dwelling in the Middle East and the African nations. But this is where he talks about the folk architecture. And when we talk about the folk architecture, it directly refers with the folk traditions. And folk tradition is a direct and unself-conscious translation into physical form of culture, its needs and values, as well as the desires, dreams, and passions of people. So on the similar note, when we say it is not a conscious thing, it is an unself-conscious, it is a collective effort. And one of the important contribution in this field I want to bring is by Bernard Rudowski from the Modern Art Museum displays. One is architecture without architects. He brings a short introduction to non-pedigreed architecture. And this is a kind of contribution which talks about the tribal architecture and the symmetries where a man have built everything by himself, and as per his need, as per his values, as per his associations, and what kind of dreams he has. So Rappaport always refers to it as a kind of ideal environment of a people expressed in buildings and settlements where there is no designer, artist, or architect with an axe or grind. So there is no technical person in the field where someone is, because everyone is master of that and they're built by themselves. So he calls this as a non-pedigreed architecture. Now, there is always a discussion of what is vernacular architecture. Unfortunately, or somehow in many of the discussions I notice that it is very much narrowed down to materials itself. So I would like to give a clarification in this whole lecture series. At least one can become familiar about the vernacular architecture and how at least how it is addressed in the change context. So now Rappaport talks as folk traditions. He classifies into three stages. One is a primitive and a pre-industrial vernacular, and the high style and the modern vernacular. So how these words came before this, because this was published in about 1969, and before this time, if you look at the literature, they talk about high culture, low communities, high communities, popular cultures. So there are a variety of high and low, depending on the status of their position. That is how the culture was always seen. But now Rappaport brings these discussions into the kind of time, and it's how it is designed and how it is built. So he brings that particular the context of how it is the process of design and process of building it as an important tool, making a reference of this primitive and pre-industrial vernacular and the high style and the modern vernacular. Here he refers to a model with few individuals variations produced by societies. And here everyone can build anything and everything. So it's built by all. But whereas in the pre-industrial vernacular, it is still limited a number of building types, more individual variation of the model. So it's mostly built by the tradesmen. Whereas in the high style or the modern vernacular, here it is designed and built by a team of specialists. So I'll show you how it has been brought. And when we say the primitive societies, there is a great diffusion of knowledge of everything by all. You can see everything by all. Every aspect of tribal's life is everybody's business. It is not my home, your home. It is our home. It is everyone makes it. Everyone is part of everything. So there is no technical vocabulary in this process because there is a very little specialization beyond age and sex and any gender. And for instance, I would like to talk about Roxana Waterson's work on the Salang, the Taroja tribes in Sulawesi Islands. So where you can see even all the children, men, everyone, they are involved in the construction of this house. And they call it a living house. It's a very interesting book. One has to really go through it. The Living House, and this particular process varies slightly differently from one community to another community. Whereas in the Polynesian communities in the Pacific, you can see all the dwellings are built by the villagers themselves, and the chief's dwelling is actually built by a carpenter. And whereas in the Melanesian cultures, where the villagers build their dwellings by themselves, but then whereas the chief's dwelling, the whole village contributes to the temple or a ceremonial structure. I'll show you a good example. So in Polynesia, in Samoan tribe, which we call it as a fail is often referred from a very small structure to a very big structure also. And you can see that they're all raised in the piles in a circular shape, and people start constructing with these kind of coconut thatch and other locally available materials. So in the similarly, one of the interesting works of vernacular architecture of Papua New Guinea, which is adjacent to the Indonesia, you can see that these dwellings, similar things we'll also find in the Sri Lankan communities, a part of Sri Lanka as well. And you can see they use the kind of coconut leaves, embedded coconut leaves, and they made these kind of dwellings, and in order to protect themselves from the floods and to raise on a slight plinth. And here you can see the whole settlement. So they're all the dwellings here, the residences, all these are the residences, right? They're all built by the villagers, by themselves, their own dwelling. They know that because they know the needs, they know their family size, they know the requirement. But whereas in the ceremonial building here, you can see, which is a huge public place here, where they do certain rituals and the practices. So that is actually the whole village might come forward and build it. I'll show you some good examples of that. And here you can see the big difference between the ceremonial buildings and the residential buildings. Here they are very symbolic. And in fact, when the village builds these things, the fine crafts, you can see it's finely crafted. Now, this yam house detail, sometimes it is a kind of cultural building where they store some of their food products as well, the roots, the things like that. And even they give a great detail even in the selection of timber, the quality of timber, and even they give a great detail of the kind of finishing, the kind of artwork it is done, because it also symbolizes the wealth of the community, because it has to be durable, it has to be it has to really indicate their sense of belonging. And you can see a little variations in the housing typologies, where the elders' house they built, and whereas the family houses how they built here. And now, earlier in my previous slide, which we talked about, the primitive refers to a model with a few individual variations. So which means in the Dogon tribe discussion also, we talked about very few individual variations. Maybe a chief's house or a ceremonial will be slightly different, but whereas the communals, they're all mostly of a similar version of it. And it is built by all. But when we coming to a little progression, and we can see some kind of variations, whether it is an elderly house, whether it is a big family house or anything. So slight variations are coming up. And now, which I talked about these ceremonial structures in Tobriand Islands in Papua New Guinea. These am houses contain a very high symbolic architectural elements and adornments, and the fine level of detail and craftsmanship indicate the cultural importance of such structures, decorative features, construction quality, and also the permanence and prominence of a am house are all the indicators of man's wealth and hierarchy. So, and these structures, why they are used? These structures are used to store yams, which is a common root vegetable. So, however, only the most impressive yams of the harvest will be put in the display in a yam house. So, why they are paying more attention to make it more attractive and make it more dominant and make it more identified as a cultural or a particular importance? So because it also shows the wealth of the community. Now, we talk about the same primitive aspect of it. I'll give you another example in Jenne, and this is also one of the heritage site, the Jenne Mosque. Here, it's completely built with mud, and these come in the local communities. Even today, how they restore this mosque is they do a kind of rituals every year. So they get mud from the river, and then so all, whether it is by gender, by age, everyone participates in the construction of this kind of religious building. So here they have every year they celebrate a particular time of the year, they celebrate a particular ritual. So in order to, because mud buildings always need certain maintenance, and in that particular maintenance process, it needs a very periodical maintenance. Sometimes some structures, they need for even sometimes in every couple of months, or sometimes every 1 or 2 years, like that. But here you can see that all the men and the women, they get the sand, the mud from the river banks, and then they all make the mixture with all the animal leftover, animal dungs and all these things. They make a mixture, and then you can see all these the male workers, they do the finishing part of it. So which means everyone is supporting with each other. So why I'm bringing this example now here? Yes, everyone knows how to build it, but now each one of them are defining their roles. So the woman is bringing all these mud and the children, and the men, they are becoming the experts in making the plastering work or the restoration work of it. So in that way everyone is getting involved, and gradually, if you look at it, the specialization, the tasks are defined, and here from if we have to slightly move from the primitive into the post industrial vernacular, here I want to refer the importance of the primitive is, since the average member of the group builds his own house, he understands their needs, he understands the requirements, and if there is any problems comes, then he himself try to modify it, or he knows how to deal with it. So just imagine he made his own house, and now he started dealing, he put the whole covered with a, let's say, a Dogon tribe, he covered with a cow dung, the animal dung on the top of the roof, and imagine a small leakage comes. Now he will try to deal with it with an alternative methods through a trial and error process. So there are course prescribed ways of doing and not doing things. So through this error and trial and error procedures, so they develop certain ways of doing and certain ways of not doing. So this is what we call a trial and error procedures. And finally, through a certain time, he adjusts that model. So whatever the model he developed, yes, he defines, yes, this is it's a well fits. For example, a bunga from Gujarat, obviously they might have tried and they might have fixed it for a circular shape or a particular height, low height, and with the central post in. So all these things have evolved in time, and so how long he keep trying? So until it satisfies most of the cultural, physical, and maintenance requirements. So now, with all these processes which I explained to you, it is very difficult to define vernacular. So some often say it is domestically produced and domestically consumed, but here what I'm trying to relate are from the Rappaport's work and the Bernard Rudolphy's work and various other work is it is referring not just a product, it is referring to a process, how it is designed and built. It is not referring to just a product, it is a process of designing and building. Now, when we say about the transformation from a primitive building to a pre-industrial vernacular, so here, what is the difference between the primitive and the pre-industrial vernacular? Even here also, everyone in the societies knows the building types and even know how to build them also. And the expertise of tradesmen being a matter of degree. Here, you have your house, you know how to build it. But then you know what you want, you know what kind of typology is accepted, but then you also bring a tray, because in our previous discussion of Jenny's scales, that is still an indigenous way of looking at it, how everyone participates, which is a primitive way of doing it. But then they're also defining the roles of certain gender, bringing mud and doing things, and certain men working on the plaster work. So obviously it is giving a way for defining certain skills, and that has gradually brought the tradesmen into the picture. And here also, the peasant owner is still a very much participant in the designing process, but he is not a consumer, right? So he knows the whole building typology, he knows how to do it, but now the tasks are now getting scattered. In the pre-industrial vernacular, the accepted forms still exist, thus offering a way of arriving at a definition of vernacular by looking at the design process. So here it is not just everyone is building it, but then different in time it has given a scope at a weaver. Let's say a weaver. I'll show you an example. Now, a weaver's house somewhere in Bundelkhand or in area, he developed his profession. He knows how to view. In time, he is aware of what kind of spaces he needs. He is aware of his traditional houses, which he got from his ancestors. But then with time, he is also interacting. But now the question is whether he is able to build it by his own, because his now the skills are differentiated, and the knowledge is also passed on from a weaver to weaver, a potter to potter, and now a builder to builder. So that is how the tradesmen are employed for certain skills, though they know how to build and everything, but still these kind of integration. Similarly, I'll tell you a good example of granary in a Ponti village in Uttarakhand. So you can find these kind of granaries all over in the hill regions of Uttarakhand. What the specialty is, because of being in a high altitude and also in a cold climatic conditions, they have a little underneath, they have these storage things, and then which is basically covered with built as a wooden structure. So why they have selected that wooden? Now, wooden has a quality. In summer it makes it cool, and as well as in winter it makes it warm. So even during snow season also, they can still store the whole food grains within this, so granaries. But now in today's context, can we find these craftsmen who can actually make these houses or make these granaries? It is very difficult to find these craftsmen. Now here in the last slide, what we have just discussed is about how we are actually moving into from the primitive to the pre-industrial vernacular architecture, where built by all is going into built by the tradesmen, right? Again, I'll go back to your slide of which we showed the basic definition of pre-industrial. It is still limited a number of building types. Now here we got a granary type, we got a chief's building, you got an elderly building, you got different types based on their needs and the individual variation of the model, but built by the tradesman. Now when we come back from here, I think I would like to summarize here. We are moving from 1969 and a lot of work has been done in the next 2 decades. And one of the interesting work comes from Paul Oliver. Paul Oliver, who is also my mentor, and from Oxford Brookes University, who actually established the Center for Vernacular Architecture Studies. So one of the important contribution is He developed an encyclopedia of vernacular architecture of the world. And this is a huge compilation, this is a huge task. The whole world vernacular architecture has been defined. And here, the definition of vernacular architecture, he summarizes the whole discussion, whatever we have discussed, from primitive to pre-industrial vernacular, the built by all and to built to meet needs. The vernacular architecture comprises the dwellings and all other buildings of the people related to their environmental context and available resources. They are customarily owner or community built. As I said, the owner or community built, which I gave you just examples, utilizing traditional technologies, so which are basically locally available and how they have developed through a trial and error procedures. All forms of vernacular architecture are built to meet specific needs, accommodating the values, economies, and ways of living of the cultures that produce them. So here, one of the important thing which he mentions is the built to meet specific needs. This is one of the important thing we have to identify. Now, here till now, we have just talked about the basic definition of what Paul has given vernacular architecture's definition. And we discussed about how Amos Rappaport have defined the various folk traditions, how he classifies from primitive to pre-industrial vernacular, and the high style and the modern vernacular. Here in the last case, we just go back to show you, which we'll be discussing in the later classes also. Here the high style and the modern vernacular, which we'll be discussing later, later part of our course, is here now a carpenter has become, he have developed his own task, a builder and a person, a landscape architect, and it is now designed and built by a team of specialists. So in this whole process, from a tradesman, it is again segregated into different pockets. Now a landscape person is doing the horticultural part of it, and then the carpenter is doing the wooden construction of the wooden members or any other thing, and this is how it has segregated into the different teams and specializations. So sometimes this is a problem of how different teams don't correlate with each other. So anyways, that high vernacular we'll be discussing later, but at least this has given you a basic understanding of what is the vernacular architecture. It is not just limited to a product, it is not limited to a material, it is a process of how it is designed and how it is built. So it reflects from a scale of a small tribal hamlets to a scale of an urban design. So this is a very misconception that only people think that it is only the primitive or the indigenous things referred to vernacular architecture, but the discourse extends to the space, how a settlement is planned, how their public spaces are evolved, how they use those spaces. Okay, I think here I end my discussion on this, and I thank you very much, and see you in the next lecture. Thank you.